Imagine writing a piece of music so instantly recognizable, so universally famous that it practically becomes the soundtrack of an entire century.
Right, like it's played everywhere.
Exactly. It's in concert halls every single day. It gets recorded hundreds of times. It basically cements your legacy forever.
Which is the dream, right?
Yeah, for anyone who creates art, that sounds like the ultimate dream. But then imagine turning to your friends, looking at this wildly successful piece and saying that it is your only true masterpiece and that unfortunately there's no music in it.
It is just a stunning admission.
Right?
And the thing is, he wasn't being falsely modest either. That was his genuine critical opinion of his own work.
So we are talking about Maurice Ravel today and his opinion of his most famous work, Bolero. And honestly, that paradox perfectly captures the incredible walking contradiction that we are exploring in this deep dive.
He really was a walking contradiction.
He was. We're looking at a French composer from the late 19th and early 20th century. And, usually history books just slap the label Impressionist on him and move right on to the next chapter.
A label which he absolutely despised, by the way. He spent so much of his career fighting against it.
Yeah, so our mission today is to look right past that label. We want to uncover the actual man behind the music for you. And the sources we've gathered paint a picture of someone completely unexpected.
Oh, really?
I mean, we are looking at this impeccably dressed, 5'3" perfectionist who composed music like a brilliant watchmaker, yet somehow got expelled from music school twice.
Yeah, twice.
A man who drove a munitions truck through a literal war zone, stood up to raging wartime nationalism, and ultimately suffered this really tragic silent end where the beautiful music he created was completely trapped inside his own mind.
It's a heavy story. But to understand how someone like Ravel operated, you really have to start with the environment that shaped his brain.
Okay, let's start there.
If you look at his childhood, it was this bizarre, almost contradictory blend of strict mechanical engineering on one hand and highly expressive folk art on the other.
So he was born in 1875, right, in a Basque town right near the Spanish border.
Right. And his mother was of Basque Spanish heritage, and she would constantly sing him these beautiful traditional folk songs.
So you have this very fluid cultural, emotional input on one side.
Exactly. But then you look at his father, Joseph Ravel. Joseph was not a musician at all. He was a highly successful engineer and inventor.
Okay.
He actually helped build an early internal combustion engine. He was just fascinated by how things functioned. And he built this infamous circus machine called the Whirlwind of Death.
Which I just have to say sounds like a metal band. But it was actually a car trick, right?
Yeah, it was an automotive loop-the-loop track. You can picture those old wooden roller coasters or stunt tracks.
Oh, wow.
It was a massive attraction until it unfortunately caused a fatal crash at the Barnum and Bailey Circus in 1903. Yeah. But the important takeaway from Maurice Ravel's life is that his father delighted in taking his young sons into factories. He wanted Maurice to look at the latest mechanical devices,
To understand the gears, the pistons, all that.
Exactly. The math of how things fit together to create movement.
And what stands out to me here is that Ravel was not your typical Mozart-style child prodigy, the kind who just sat at the piano and magically channeled the heavens.
No, not at all. His mom actually had to bribe him to practice.
Right. He was highly musical, but he was never considered an amazing pianist. His genius was always in the mechanics of creating the music.
Yeah, the assembly of it.
It makes me think of his compositional style like building with perfectly engineered Lego bricks.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Like if other composers of his day were molding soft clay, just freely shaping these fluid, spontaneous, emotional sculptures, Ravel was a master architect. Every single note, every brick had to click perfectly into place.
The Lego analogy really hits the nail on the head because it speaks to how he viewed structure. To Ravel, music was basically a mathematical puzzle.
Interesting.
Yeah, he would use these really rigid structures, retrograde inversions, strict counterpoint, highly specific instrumentation to just lock his melodies into place.
So it wasn't just about pure feeling for him.
No, he didn't want to just express a feeling. He wanted to build a flawless machine that produced that feeling in the listener.
But, okay, if he's raised by an engineer and he is utterly obsessed with perfect mechanics, to the point of wearing these meticulous, perfectly tailored dandy outfits. It seems strange that by 1900, he falls in with a group of self-proclaimed artistic outcasts.
Ah,
They
yeah.
literally called themselves the hooligans.
Les Apache, yes. It translates to the hooligans.
Yeah.
It was this informal collective of innovative artists, poets, musicians.
Like who?
Well, you had absolute heavyweights of the era passing through, like Igor Stravinsky and Manuel de Falla.
So how does the ultimate perfectionist fit in with a gang of hooligans?
Because for them, being a hooligan didn't mean being sloppy or, chaotic. It meant being an outcast from the conservative, stuffy traditions of the French musical establishment.
Ah, got it.
Ravel's methods were incredibly meticulous and engineered, like we said, but his ideas were entirely progressive. He wanted to break the old rules of harmony. He wanted to innovate.
And I'm guessing the establishment didn't like that.
In the eyes of the conservative academics who ran the music world, that made him a very dangerous rebel.
And they really despised him for it. Which brings us to the Paris Conservatoire. This is France's premier music college, the ultimate gatekeeper of all success. And Ravel gets expelled from it. Twice.
Yeah, the rules of the conservatoire were rigid. If you failed to win a competitive medal in 3 consecutive years, you were automatically dismissed.
Wow.
And Ravel simply didn't fit their mold, so he was pushed out. But the real drama, like the defining conflict of his early career, revolves around the Prix de Rome.
Right. This was France's absolute top prize for young composers. Winning it essentially guaranteed your career. I mean, legends like Berlioz, Bizet, and Debussy had all won it.
And Ravel tried to win it 5 times. 5 times. And in 1905, at the age of 30, he competed for the very last time because he was hitting the age limit. And the judges eliminated him in the very first round.
Wait, okay. If we're talking about a 30-year-old college dropout getting rejected for the 5th consecutive time, was he just submitting terrible music? I mean, maybe the judges just genuinely didn't think he had the talent.
You'd think so, right? But the judges actually suspected that Ravel was openly making fun of them?
Wait.
Yeah. To enter the competition, you had to submit a cantata, which is a very strict traditional choral and orchestral piece, usually based on a sacred theme.
Okay.
Well, Ravel's submissions were incredibly academic. They followed every single rule of a conservatoire perfectly, but they were so stiff and conventional that they were essentially subtle parodies of the judge's own traditional tastes.
Oh, wow. So he was basically trolling the establishment with perfect technique.
Exactly.
He used his little Lego bricks to build a flawless replica of their boring music just to show them how absurd it was.
That's exactly what he did. He proved he could beat them at their own game. But they rejected him anyway, and that 1905 rejection backfired on the establishment spectacularly.
Oh, so?
It sparked a massive national scandal that the press dubbed l'affaire Ravel, the Ravel affair.
Because the press started digging into the judges, right?
They did. Journalists uncovered that the senior professor on the jury, a man named Charles Lenepveu, had only selected his own students for the final round.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
Nope. Every single finalist was studying under him. When confronted, he claimed it was just a pure coincidence.
Sure was.
The public outrage over the blatant corruption was so immense that it actually forced the director of the conservatoire to step down and retire early.
What?
Yeah, the government had to step in and replace him with Gabriel Fauré, who happened to be Ravel's former teacher and one of his biggest supporters. And Fauré completely cleaned house.
So Ravel essentially topples the conservative establishment just by being unfairly rejected. He never even had to raise his voice.
Pretty much.
But the moment the old guard is out of the way, Ravel is thrust right into the spotlight. And the public and the critics immediately do what they always do. They pit him against the other reigning genius of French music, Claude Debussy.
Which is such a natural human instinct, right, to create a binary choice.
Yeah,
But it's highly frustrating for the artists involved.
definitely.
The public labeled both Ravel and Debussy as impressionist. And as we mentioned, both men hated that term. They had very different approaches.
Curious, so.
While Ravel felt Debussy was spontaneous and casual in his composing, Debussy was painting with watercolors. Ravel, on the other hand, saw himself as a craftsman. He was cutting diamonds.
It feels so much like the classic music rivalries we still see today, right? Like the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. Usually the artists have a mutual respect, but the fans and the critics make it far nastier than it needs to be. They force everyone to pick a faction.
Oh, the factions here were vicious. One prominent critic wrote a scathing review arguing that Debussy was all sensitivity, while Ravel was All insensitivity, borrowing without hesitation not only technique, but the sensitivity of other people.
Ouch.
Yeah, you can imagine how that stings an artist who spends months engineering every single chord. This constant public tension eventually led to a personal estrangement between the two men. But there was another, much more private factor that drove them apart.
And this is where Ravel's personal morality really shines through, because from what the sources say, Debussy had left his wife, Lily, for another woman,
Yeah,
and Lily was completely devastated, practically destitute. So Ravel, along with a few friends, secretly set up a fund to financially support Debussy's deserted first wife.
incredible, isn't it?
It is. But when Debussy found out that his supposed rival was paying for his ex-wife's survival, it likely fueled the rift significantly.
It was an act of deep loyalty from Ravel, though. He had a very strict internal moral compass, which comes to the absolute forefront when the world plunges into the horrors of World War I in 1914.
Right. When the war breaks out, Ravel is desperate to serve. He immediately tries to join the French Air Force. He looks at his small size. He's 160 centimeters, about 5'3", and very light, and he thinks, I am the perfect aviator.
He was rejected because of his age and a minor heart complaint.
Ah,
But he absolutely refused to give up.
yeah.
He kept petitioning the military.
And he eventually gets in, right?
Yes. Finally, in 1915, at the age of 40, he joins an artillery regiment as a lorry driver.
Which means he is driving massive transport and munitions trucks. He is navigating through the mud, in the dark, without headlights, under heavy German bombardment near Verdun.
It's just an incredibly dangerous, terrifying reality for a man who spent his life in salons and concert halls.
Absolutely.
And while he is physically on the front lines, dodging German artillery, something happens back home in Paris that forces him to take another dangerous stand.
The National League.
Exactly. A national league is formed in France with the express purpose of banning the performance of all contemporary German music. It was peak wartime nationalism-like cancel culture on a national scale.
Right.
They approached Ravel, assuming the famous French composer fighting on the front lines would gladly sign his name to it.
And he refuses.
He flat out refuses. He sends them a highly public letter warning that it would be disastrous for French composers to systematically ignore their foreign colleagues.
Wow.
He explicitly stated that isolating French art would make it degenerate into banal formulas. He defended the artistic merit of his German counterparts, men like Arnold Schoenberg, while he was literally at war with the German army.
The integrity that takes is just astounding. To look at your own country in the middle of a brutal war and say, we cannot let our hatred blind us to good art. Yeah. And the League's response was swift and pretty petty. They banned Ravel's music from being played in France.
They did. And the war just took a massive physical and psychological toll on him overall. He suffered from severe dysentery, had to undergo a bowel operation, and developed frostbite in his feet from the terrible conditions.
That is awful.
He was eventually discharged. But the most devastating blow came in 1917 when his beloved mother passed away. He fell into a profound, suffocating despair. He stopped composing almost entirely for 3 years.
It's hard to even process that level of compounding tragedy. He loses his health, he witnesses the slaughter of Verdun, his music is banned by his own people, and then he loses the mother who first introduced him to the folk melodies he loved so much.
It was a silence that many thought he wouldn't return from.
But the way he emerges from that silence is fascinating. We enter the 1920s, the world is trying to rebuild, and Ravel comes back to music. But his style has changed, hasn't it? He starts stripping away the extravagance.
Completely. Post-war Ravel is a study in economy. Before the war, French music featured these massive, sweeping, lush orchestras. Now, Ravel wanted to reveal the bare essentials.
Interesting.
His textures became sparer, he leaned into the mechanics even more, and he started drawing heavily on modern, international influences. He became obsessed with American jazz, the energy of skyscrapers, and the dark psychological writings of Edgar Allan Poe.
He ends up going on a massive 4-month tour of North America in 1928. And this introverted perfectionist essentially becomes a rock star.
Code a rock star.
He demands a guaranteed minimum of $10,000, which was a fortune back then, and a constant, uninterrupted supply of his favorite French Gauloises, cigarettes.
You got to have the cigarettes.
Right. Audiences went absolutely wild for him. At one concert in New York, the entire audience stood up and applauded for minutes just as he walked to his seat. He turned to his companion and dryly remarked, this doesn't happen to me in Paris.
He was revered over there. And while he was there, George Gershwin famously approached him and asked him for composition lessons.
Oh, wow. What did Ravel say?
Ravel thought about it, and politely refused.
Hmm.
He told Gershwin that taking lessons from him would probably just cause Gershwin to write bad Ravel and lose his own great gift for spontaneous melody.
That is such a profound self-awareness.
Yeah, he recognized that Gershwin's magic was his intuition, which shouldn't be boxed in by Ravel's strict mechanics.
He really knew how to protect the integrity of the art, and he certainly wasn't afraid to burn bridges if his own artistic integrity was questioned.
Definitely not.
The biggest example of this is his feud with Sergei Diaghilev, the legendary Russian ballet impresario.
Oh, yeah. Diaghilev had commissioned a piece from Ravel called La Valse. Ravel spent years meticulously crafting it. He envisioned it as a fatal, whirling apotheosis of the Viennese waltz, a waltz that slowly spirals completely out of control into chaos, kind of mirroring the destruction of European society in the war.
Right.
Ravel presents it to Diaghilev, who listens to it and says, "It's a masterpiece, but it's not a ballet. It's the portrait of a ballet."
Which honestly sounds like a compliment until you realize he's rejecting it. Why would he call it a portrait?
Because Diaghilev recognized that the music was so dense, so rhythmically complex, and spun so far out of control by the end, that human dancers couldn't possibly track the beat on a stage.
Yeah.
It was a painting of a dance, not a functional piece for dancers to use, so he refused to stage it.
And Ravel's response. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just packed up his score, left the room, and the two men never spoke again.
A total, permanent breach over artistic vision.
Ravel was uncompromising, and he loved taking on these incredibly restrictive technical challenges to prove what his mechanics could do. For instance, he wrote a brilliant piano concerto for the left hand.
Yes.
It was commissioned by Paul Wittgenstein, an Austrian concert pianist who had actually lost his right arm fighting in the First World War.
Exactly.
This is one of those concepts that just breaks my brain. How do you write a full, lush piano concerto for a guy with one arm and make it sound like two hands are playing?
It is pure engineering. Ravel structured the piece so that the thumb of the left hand carries the main melody, singing out in the middle register of the piano.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the remaining four fingers are executing these massive, sweeping arpeggios that jump across the keyboard. He utilized the piano's sustain pedal masterfully so a bass note would ring out while the hand flew up to hit a chord. If you close your eyes, the acoustic illusion is flawless. You hear two hands.
That is just incredible. Which brings us back to the elephant in the room, the piece we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Bolero.
Bolero, composed in 1928. If Ravel is a mastermind of orchestration, a guy who builds these incredibly complex illusions and values melody, why would he write a 17-minute piece that is essentially just a repeating rhythm loop and a slow volume crescendo? What is the mechanism there?
Ravel himself called it an experiment in a very special and limited direction. The underlying mechanism is brutally simple. There is a snare drum that plays the exact same two-bar rhythm over and over, 169 times.
169 times.
So,
Wow.
the tempo never changes.
Yeah.
The rhythm never changes. The melody just passes from one instrument to another, slowly adding more instruments to build a massive crescendo of volume.
So there's really no variation.
Ravel openly admitted there were no contrasts and practically no musical invention. It is pure mechanical execution, like a factory machine slowly powering up.
And at the premiere, there's this legendary story of an old lady in the audience who becomes so agitated by this relentless hypnotic loop that she stands up and yells, "Rubbish!"
Yeah.
And Ravel, completely calm, just remarks, "That old lady got the message." He knew exactly what he had built. He intended to agitate.
He did. He was actually astonished that it became a massive global success. It was just a structural experiment to him. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of his life, that obsessive repeating rhythm might not have just been an artistic choice.
Really?
Yeah. Modern medical experts look at the repetitive nature of Bolero, and some suspect it was actually an early neurological warning sign.
This is where the story takes a truly heartbreaking turn. In October 1932, Ravel is riding in a taxi in Paris. It gets into an accident and he suffers a blow to the head. At first it seemed minor, but soon after his behavior changes. He begins to suffer from aphasia.
And aphasia is a terrifying condition where the brain's ability to process language and symbols just breaks down. You lose the ability to speak fluently, to read, or to write.
Oh, man.
Modern medical experts suggest he may have been suffering from frontotemporal dementia or another underlying neurological disease, and the head trauma from the crash rapidly accelerated the decline.
The visceral horror of his final years is hard to even fathom. Imagine being a master creator, someone whose entire life is built on precision and communication, and slowly losing your interface with the world. He lost his memory. He He lost the ability to coordinate his movements. He couldn't play the piano. Most devastatingly, he lost the ability to write down music.
But the true tragedy, like the ultimate cruelty of his condition, was that his auditory imagery remained perfectly intact. His internal mind was completely untouched.
That's devastating.
He would sit at concerts and weep, telling his friends that he had so much more music to give. The watchmaker's mind was still ticking perfectly in time. He could hear the beautiful new symphonies in his head. But the physical machinery to output it, the ability to translate those thoughts into notes on a page, was completely broken.
He was physically trapped inside his own body, with the art perfectly alive inside him. In 1937, desperate for a cure, he agreed to undergo an experimental brain surgery, hoping it would relieve whatever pressure was causing the block.
Yeah.
But the surgery was unsuccessful. He fell into a coma and died shortly after at the age of 62.
Yet even as his body failed him, the core of who he was remained. True to his rebellious nature, he remained utterly defiant of the establishment right up until the very end.
He really did.
Throughout his life, he famously refused the Légion d'honneur and all other French state honors. He wouldn't even let his friends put his name forward for the Institut de France. The hooligan inside the dandy never died.
So, as we look back at his life, what does this all leave us with? Because he was such a painstaking, slow worker, Ravel left behind a relatively small output of about 60 performable works. But almost every single one of those pieces is considered an absolute masterpiece of orchestration and form.
He built musical machines that were so perfectly balanced, so structurally sound, that they will run forever. They don't age.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. Ravel once said he learned from the writings of Edgar Allan Poe that true art is a perfect balance between pure intellect and emotion.
Right.
We often assume that strict rules, perfect structures, and intense technical limitations like building with rigid Lego bricks instead of soft clay must somehow restrict human emotion in art. We think that structure is the enemy of feeling.
Exactly. That's the common assumption.
But looking at the life, the tragedies, and the deeply moving work of Maurice Ravel, you have to ask yourself, do those intense, rigid mechanics actually restrict our emotion? Or are they the exact things required to set that emotion free?